Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Today is Wednesday, October 12th, 2022. Lots of stuff to discuss today. We've got a really good interview with Bryce Eddy about a new Turning Point USA documentary series called Border Battle. And we're going to hear a lot about the border. We're going to hear a little bit about Bryce Eddy's podcast on the Salem platform, the Salem Podcast Network as well. So you'll want to stick around for all of that. Great conversation with Bryce Eddy. And I think you're really going to enjoy Border Battle. This is something that Salem is doing. Salem being, of course, our parent company as well. Salem is doing this on its Salem Now platform, and it's available right now. You have to be a subscriber to get to this, but it's a great docuseries. It is something that it interviews experts about what's really at stake on the border, and even people who, people like you and I, who are fairly well tied into the news on this, may not understand the entire scope of what's going on the border. And I think that this is part of what Border Battle is going to help us understand. So great conversation coming up with Bryce Eddy. Make sure you stay tuned for all of the Ed Morrissey Show podcast, and then go over and check out Border Battle. And I'll have the trailer for it embedded in the show post when it goes up later this afternoon. By the way, we've got other news on the website today at hotair.com. Nothing yet in the VIP section, where Jazz is just coming back from being ill, and so we don't have any VIP content to put up today yet, but we will have the VIP Gold Chat, and that will have already taken place by the time you've seen this, but you can go back and watch it if you're a VIP Gold member, and you can access that and then join us for the live versions of that, because that's an awful lot of fun. In the meantime, we've got a lot of free content up on there. I have a post up right now talking about Germany rebuffing Putin's offer to restore the natural gas supplies through the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which apparently has either been repaired or wasn't seriously enough damage to knock it out of commission. Now, remember that Nord Stream 2 never was in operation. It was in the process of being certified by Germany when Europe started sanctioning Russia over the war in Ukraine. And Germany just said, we're not going to certify this, period, end of story, so we will never turn it on. And the German government, Olaf Scholz is the chancellor right now. And the question was put to Christiane Hoffmann, who is the spokesperson for the Scholz government. And she said, nice try to Putin's offer to turn on the gas. Remember that it was about 6 or 7 weeks ago that Putin turned the gas off entirely, and in a hope of forcing either Europe to withdraw its support for Ukraine in exchange for access to Russian gas, or at least to split the EU, NATO, the Western Alliance in some fashion, because Germany was highly dependent on this to warm houses in very cold winters. And political implications of having the Russian gas cut off is, not difficult to imagine. So the fact that Hoffmann and Scholz are sticking to this position, I think, is an act of political bravery. Because there are people in Germany who are demanding that Germany finds some sort of accommodation with Russia to get the gas turned back on. Now, the attack on Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2 at least put that possibility off for a bit. But up until today, Putin hadn't been inclined to turn the gas back on. Now he's inclined to turn the gas back on, but it's because he is realizing that his strategies of dividing the West, separating the West from Ukraine, and the escalate to de-escalate strategy that is part of the Russian, the Russian playbook, I guess you can call it. Typical Russian strategy is that you escalate so far up that everybody has to buckle, because they don't want to run the risk of whatever escalation Russia is threatening. Well, that's not working. And after having hinted at using nuclear weapons and not seeing any de-escalation from the West on this point, it's starting to become clear that Putin has painted himself into a corner and doesn't know how to get out. So today, Putin is in Turkey. He's I believe in Ankara, meeting with Recep Erdogan. And the Kremlin is even acknowledging today that they're hoping that what Turkey will do is facilitate some sort of talks to negotiate an end to the war. And I mean, I think that that's a really stunning admission from the Kremlin. And I was very tempted to put up a headline that said, "Rescue, help us, Erdogan, Obi Erdogan, you're our only hope." But so I did say rescue us, Erdogan, with a question mark in the headline of this. But I think that what's important to understand about that is that they're looking for a way out. Now they're looking for a way out. After the escalate to de-escalate strategy didn't work, after the missile attacks on Ukraine over the last couple of days clearly wasn't getting Ukraine to back down, after threatening a very empty threat to combine up with Belarus on the northern front again, with conscripts in the Belarusian army, which is not an army at all. I mean, it's an internal security force, basically. It's never been in battle. And Alexander Lukashenko's position in Belarus is so untenable that even a hint that they were going to join Putin's invasion of Ukraine in a second attempt to capture Kyiv would likely, first off, it would likely occupy all of Belarus's, military forces as they are, and secondly, would touch off an uprising that would almost certainly dethrone Lukashenko and make matters worse for Putin. And Putin's got to understand that. I mean, Lukashenko's is on a very thin reed as it is, and the more pressure he puts on Belarus to cooperate in this Ukraine war, the riskier it becomes that Belarus actually goes through a revolution that makes Belarus unfriendly territory to Russia, and then suddenly their entire western border becomes a frontier for at least potentially hostile nations. It makes matters worse, makes matters exponentially worse. Finland's going to join NATO. That makes it worse. I mean, if Belarus topples over and a pro-Western government takes over in Belarus, Putin will have single-handedly made the Russian security situation about as bad as it possibly could be. And I don't think he'd survive that either. So I think he's looking for a way out, and cross our fingers that he's doing that. Now, if you watched yesterday's podcast, I talked with Ambassador Francis Rooney about this, and we actually had a long conversation about how you get to an end of this war. And basically, he's saying that the West needs to sit down and force both parties to come to some sort of compromise to stop the fighting. And that might just be a return to status quo ante. He thinks that Zelensky's attacks on Crimea right now is maybe also incentivizing Vladimir Putin to look for a negotiated end to this. I think the Kerch Bridge attack might be doing that as well, because that's coming down. If this, they're going to be going after that again. And if this goes any longer than the next few days, that Kerch Bridge is probably going to fall. I would be very surprised if Ukraine doesn't target that again. It's a main line of communication to Russian forces in Crimea. If they knock it out, they're basically going to isolate the troops that are in there. They're going to basically make it a pocket. And the only thing that they can use to get troops in and out of there are ferries, and for that matter, supplies. So it's a very interesting situation. Plus, there's tons more, of course, at Hot Air. I'm going to talk about how, and I've got the post written, it'll be up before this podcast publishes today. I talk about how mainstream media is covering for John Fetterman, and you can really see this. By the way, they went after NBC's Dasha Burns for just reporting on what she observed of John Fetterman in the very first in-person television interview that the campaign has allowed to happen since John Fetterman had a stroke 5 months ago. We're 4 weeks away from Election Day. And this is the first time that they're allowing a reporter from a significant news outlet to sit and do a television interview with the candidate. I mean, first off, that should tell reporters there's a problem here. And rather than pick up on what Dasha Burns said yesterday on MSNBC, which I reported yesterday, instead, they're going after Dasha Burns for saying something. Oh, well, we've had him on the phone and we haven't noticed anything like that. Just remember, Dave, I make explicit reference to this. Just remember David Burgess and Jim Treacher's first rule of journalism, which is that you cover stories for Democrats with a blanket until they die. And you'll understand the reaction to this. Our friends at Twitchy are collating that. I would definitely recommend that you go follow that link over to Twitchy. I'm not the only person writing at Hot Air, though. I am remiss if I don't talk about some of the great stuff that's up there. Jazz is back. He actually wrote a couple of great pieces today about Joe Biden. One is about Joe Biden's interview with Jake Tapper on CNN yesterday. You'll definitely want to watch that. I wrote about inflation. You can see that already. Inflation is still raging. This is not bending downwards. This is still bending upwards. And as one Fed chair said in the wake of the producer price index report this morning, there's been no progress on inflation. And don't forget, we're going to get the consumer price index report tomorrow, which probably will show the same thing. David Strom has a post up. Stanford University doctor chop them off while they're young. Karen Townsend is still following the Herschel Walker abortion story. She's skeptical of Herschel Walker's explanations of this, and you can find out how that's nuanced against skepticism about what Raphael Warnock says about his own positions and his own peccadillos. But I think she's doing a great job of making sure that we cover all the bases in that Georgia Senate race. Jazz also has a post up about Canadian law enforcement surveilling an American gun show in Montana. I think that you're going to definitely want to read about that. And John Sexton, by the time this comes up, John Sexton may have what's going to end up being the story of the day, which is that issue with the mounted Border Patrol agents last year, where they were supposedly whipping migrants from their horses. Turns out we already knew this turned out to be nonsense. Those were reins, not whips, and they were following a particular tactic to make sure that that hostile people didn't grab the horses, and instead abided by the orders that these Border Patrol agents were giving. And so nobody was being whipped at all. They were just trying to keep the people from grabbing the horses. We knew this almost immediately, but the Biden administration, Joe Biden himself, Alejandro Mayorkas, and everybody else insisted that this was horrifying and they're going to do a deep investigation. Well, to no one's big surprise, I think, it turns out that DHS and the administration and Mayorkas knew within hours that story was not true and still acted as though it was. A FOIA request from Fox News finally got serviced after they had to go to court to enforce it. And emails that preceded Alejandro Mayorkas's public remarks on this it shows that he was told that story was not true, and yet he went out and slandered these Border Patrol agents anyway. It's infuriating. You're going to be infuriated. John's doing a great job on writing that up as I speak, and so that may end up being the story of the day. So keep an eye on that. I think you're going to see Republican calls for Mayorkas's impeachment grow significantly. And if Republicans take control of the House and the Senate, I think we're looking at a resignation pretty soon after the midterms. I think that Biden at that point will cut his losses and find somebody else to take over Homeland Security. All right, well, stay tuned for Bryce Eddy about the new Turning Point USA / Salem joint production of Border Battle. It's available now on salemnow.com. So sign up. You can watch the entire, I think they've got 3 or 4 episodes up already. It's supposed to be a 6-episode docuseries, and Bryce Eddy talks all about that coming up right now. Thanks for watching, and don't miss a minute of the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast, and I stand in awe of my guest today. Bryce Eddy, one of the Salem podcasters, is joining us for the first time to talk about a Salem Now project and Turning Point USA production, a docuseries on the border called Border Battle. And look, from the trailer, this looks absolutely fascinating, and we talk a lot about the border, Bryce, but as Charlie Kirk says in this, is that, we're getting most of the story, but we're not really getting the full scope of it.
No, you're right. We aren't. And so I went down to the border over the last year a few times, and our team went down a few times, and I got to tour kind of what was going on in our first couple of trips and talk to the sheriff's departments down there, talk to some of the actual individuals who own private property and ranches and things like that, and some of the neighborhoods that are impacted by what's going on. And then our company, we're a security consulting firm and a guard services company, and we do a lot of private-public partnerships with law enforcement agencies and military here domestically. And so we got brought down and were embedded with the sheriff's departments down there, and actually got to do operations with them on the border. So, we were down there for quite a while, a few days at a time, actually, in the middle of the night, hunting down human traffickers and drug traffickers, and seeing all that was happening. And what happens very frequently that I got to witness, because we rolled up on a section of border wall in Yuma, Arizona, and we weren't there for more than 20 minutes. And then a number of people started to cross the border at that juncture. And it ended up being roughly about 50 plus people. And the camera crews that were with us for the documentary got to interview people. And so we witnessed all kinds of crazy things, some of which were very disturbing that we'll, I'm sure, get into here.
It's interesting, Bryce, because at the moment I'm a huge fan of the docuseries format, and I'm actually watching one that you probably would enjoy if you haven't already seen it. It was about 4 or 5 years ago. CNN did a series on covert operations, and I forget exactly what the name of it is now at the moment, but it's about 3 seasons. I would guess about 20 episodes roughly, various different covert operations that took place over the last 60, 70 years or so. Really fascinating stuff. And a lot of this is kind of hair raising, because some of this stuff gets into, nuclear areas, Cold War, brinksmanship type of stories. And, after you really go through this and go, wow, I mean, I thought I was pretty well connected for most of this, and I really had no idea what was going on. And I get the sense of that same thing. I mean, you got some really good experts on there. You've got a couple of sheriffs on. Well, you're going to have a bunch of experts. I haven't even seen how many you're going to actually have on this. But I mean, I think that that's just from the 3-minute clip, which we've embedded it higher now a couple times. You get the sense that, man, there's a ton of really hair-raising things about this that it really is beyond our comprehension. I was really amazed just in the trailer, Bryce, about the idea that you've got armored divisions in these the cartels,
Mm-hmm.
and they're conducting drone bombings on the Mexican side of the border. And when you've got somebody from the U.S. government saying, we've never seen anything like this before, I mean, popping eyes open here.
Yeah, no, they're a parallel government down there, and the cartels are in charge of our border. We are not in charge of our border. In fact, we interview a number of border officials and border patrol agents. Most of which are remaining anonymous in the recording. But they are disheartened. They're demoralized. I think you probably saw the Project Veritas clip where they interviewed the guy, and he openly just said, "Hey, all we are is a shuttle service now." And it's a shame, because these guys want to do the work, and they're being held back by our current administration. And those cartels run things down there, and they are a military organization. It's really phenomenal to see.
They're a military organization. They're also I guess they're a sales organization, or at least they're a distribution organization, right? Because what the reason why this matters, well, there's lots of reasons why this matters. If it was just an immigration crisis, that would be bad enough, right? I mean, because you just need to have control of your border. You need to know who's coming in and out of your country. You need to have some sort of rational way of assigning asylum where it's needed and denying it where it's not. But the drug traffic, and especially fentanyl, I think is really, again, a scope larger than people understand it to be. And the whole drift of this is basically they're controlling the border as a means of promoting their fentanyl business, among other drugs, right? But fentanyl is particularly dangerous.
Yeah, they're making a lot of money on the drug trade for sure, but also the human trafficking and what is really modern day slavery. They're making a lot of money on that. They're making quite a bit of money also on the crossings themselves. So they've got an entirely robust trade going on down there. I mean, they have a business and an industry that's surrounding the border and everything that's happening. And we're letting it go on, which is unfortunate.
So what else don't we know? And I don't want you to give away all the secrets, right? We want people to go over to salemnow.com.
Yeah. Well, listen,
and log in and watch this, but
I won't possibly be able to cover it all because there was so much that we witnessed and so many things that were happening down there. And again, to see it with my own eyes, to see the stacks of border wall material that has just been abandoned down there by the Biden administration, the wall, they just ceased working on the wall. So witnessing that in person was really startling. What would blow your mind, though, when I talked about those folks that were walking over the border, most of them were not from Mexico. In fact, I didn't number a single Mexican among them. Most were from all over the country. Many, of course, were South American. So you had people coming up from South America. But we had Eastern Europeans in there as well. We had people from the Republic of Georgia. We had people from Cuba. We had people from the Middle East. Just walking over. Again, they're paying the cartel to give them safe passage. They walk over to our side, and then you have privately contracted buses that are picking them up and taking them to processing centers. So it's really startling to see. The other thing that your listeners need to hear is that we have forward operating bases. So the cartel has forward operating bases on our side of the border, on U.S. soil. And we could see them through our binoculars. We were able to directly observe them. They were, of course, observing us. And we're talking guys with rifles, AK-47s, AR-15s, fully kitted out with body armor and everything that a military operation would need.
It's interesting. It's a long history on the border here between Mexico and the United States. And there's a sort of a cyclical nature to this because, back in the day, before World War One, Mexico and gangs in Mexico used to cross the border pretty much with impunity back then. They sent, General Jack Pershing down there to deal with it at one point, and sort of to a draw. And we've always been kind of at a draw with this. But I think in those days, it was a much more simple affair. These were people who were first off probably revolutionaries, counter-revolutionaries in Mexico who were trying to get into the United States. They were raiding American towns at the time, which is a reason why Pershing got dispatched down there. But these are not the old days, right? This is not just braceros who are coming across the border, and the passage is not very safe either, even with these human trafficking concerns. In fact, we here in Texas, we just got done seeing a truckload of migrants abandoned to their deaths in one of the hottest days of this year, one of the hottest stretches of this year, and they basically baked to death because the driver abandoned the truck and left the people locked inside. I think it was 53 people who died. So there are. I mean, it's really not the same thing. This is really on a completely different scale.
Yeah, and let's take a moment to acknowledge there are people that need asylum, and there are people that legitimately should be coming over here, and we need to reach out to them, and that's what a nation like ours does very, very well. But then there's a lot of people that it's an excuse, and no, they are not properly seeking asylum, and no, they do not need asylum in the United States. In fact, there's a lot of young men that are coming here claiming asylum that staying back in their own countries. That you cannot export your entire youth of fighting men who could actually revolutionize the places that they're coming from, and could be the ones that fight and are resisting bad governments from where they're immigrating from. But so we want to be loving, generous, and appropriate to the good people. But there's a lot that are using it for excuse. And when we interviewed some of those folks, they were talking, and you'll see this in the documentary, about how horrible it really is. And there's a tremendous amount of abuse that goes on. One of the things that I mentioned in the first episode, there's a clip of me talking about the rape trees. And there are stations along the route where they will shackle women who are unwilling against trees, and they hang their underwear as trophies in the trees. And we saw that, and I don't want to be too graphic, but condoms and little girls' underwear and everything littered at the base of these trees. So it's sickening. It makes you want to throw up. And it makes you realize that there needs to be such a sense of urgency with this issue right now.
Yeah, it's a bad situation all the way around, right? And you're right. We have asylum for a reason. The problem is that when you have this much of a flow through these systems, is that it's impossible to rationally exercise those types of policies.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. If I can interrupt, because I think people need to understand what this really is. This is an attack against sovereignty, which we've got going on worldwide right now. The whole open borders, globalist type of a movement is about sovereignty. And, they're attacking our sovereignty as nations, but they're also attacking our sovereignty in our communities. They're attacking our sovereignty as individuals right now. So there's a massive push against that, just globally and worldwide. And if you don't break our system, you can't rebuild it in your own image. And I believe that's what this whole entire thing really is about, including the allowing of the massive amount of fentanyl and everything else that's coming into the United States right now as well.
Yeah, the numbers on fentanyl are astounding. And look, again, I'm a big fan of the docuseries type of format, and that includes shows like On Patrol, right? I'm a sucker for that type of stuff, Bryce. This is the reason why the border battle on salemnow.com is right up my alley, and I got to get right on this thing and start watching it. Yeah. But one of the things that you see in these things, and I think maybe I think it was the series Body Cam on Discovery ID, is they actually had one episode where a police officer almost died just from touching this stuff in its powdered form. He didn't have his glove on, and he came in contact with this stuff and started seizing up. And the person he detained is actually the person who ended up saving his life, because that was the person who got him help. He had just rolled up to the station, but couldn't put the car in park. It was a really interesting, terrifying episode. And he came through it okay. He survived, and he's back on the job. But people, I think, don't understand two things about fentanyl. One is how deadly this stuff is. This is not just your average crystal meth. This is not cocaine. It's not even crack. This is way more deadly. And B, the scope of how much is coming across the border, how much is pouring across the border, using the strategy that you just said.
Yeah, so we serve as campus security with a lot of schools right now, and fentanyl is happening where kids are overdosing at these schools on these campuses right now. It is rampant. It is everywhere. It is being mixed in with other drugs. There's no such thing as recreational drugs now, because you could be potentially exposed to fentanyl, because they're putting it to gin up every kind of drug, on the planet right now. And so, people need to be more than cautious. The other thing that's happening now that a lot of people don't know is they're putting Narcan self-administration spots in our jails, so you can self-save. and they have those stations in our local jails now because people are smuggling it in. Of course, it's so easy to get just about anywhere, and it's so available that they're having to put, again, these Narcan stations in our jails here locally.
I mean, it's just amazing to hear that, Bryce. Um, Getting back to the destroying it to build something else. I mean, this is not the only, it's not the only context in which that's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, I know this is outside the scope of border battles, but I'm just so that I can throw this out there. I mean, we're seeing this in the destruction of all sorts of other norms, whether it comes to human biology, whether it comes to, whether or not that there is an objective truth, even to the point of science, especially when it comes to human biology, by the way. I mean, we're just seeing a complete destruction of anything that has to do with a connection to an objective reality. And really that is, I think, a push to remake the world in a particular image.
Yeah, you're right. And I talk about that on our show, which is called Liberty Station. And we talk about that regularly. And there are many different manifestations of what's happening now. Our border crisis being just one of them. The, drugs that are coming over and kind of, rotting us from within is another. And yes, the transgendering of our youth, that social contagion, the dismantling of objective truth, the changing the definitions in our language, it's all sowing the seeds of chaos. And we're seeing those aims kind of be laid bare, and I think more people are starting to wise up or wake up to it. But it's happening everywhere. It's an attack on every institution that we have, and attacking our families and our faith and everything else.
So, Bryce, tell us a little bit about Liberty Station. We should talk a little bit about Liberty Station too, because this is an up and coming podcast in the Salem firmament here, this Salem podcast firmament. Tell us when this started and what you've already given us a little bit of a look at what you're doing there, but tell us a little bit about where you want to go with Liberty Station.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you for that. Well, we're having fun doing it, but it started when Rob McCoy at Godspeed Calvary Chapel here in California. We stayed open during the pandemic and fought against the local and state government here and amassed fines and ultimately ended up winning in those endeavors. But during that time, just to stay in touch with everybody, the church started a podcast. And really what it was a live stream that what happened every night at 7 p.m., 7 days a week for an entire year, just to let everybody know they weren't alone and just to identify the times that we were in. And that slowly morphed into what we're doing now, which is a podcast that we air 4 episodes a week. Salem picked us up about 100 episodes ago, and we're already 84 on the political news and commentary charts. I think we're doing something that's a little bit different than what others are doing. So it's a conversational format. We go for just under an hour. It also gets put on one of the Salem radio stations as well. And I just interview interesting people about interesting things in the interesting times we're in. And so I get authors, I get pastors, I get politicians. I've had a knack for getting really, really good guests, and we just have fun, and we're attacking these issues, and I'm getting their perspectives, and then we'll have a few episodes here and there that are purely just because they're interesting, right. And the audience needs a break every once in a while. So I had a buddy who's a big game hunter in Africa. And we had, we showed pictures of the hippos and crocodiles and everything else that he hunted while he was there. And, and you got to let everybody up once in a while, because, if we talk too much about what's happening, especially without, letting everybody know that God wins in the end, it can be depressing in these times. But
yeah. I mean, look, podcasting, radio, even political analysis, you have to have a sense of entertainment about this, because this isn't a white paper.
Yeah.
These are not, these are not treatises. It's meant to be engaging. It's meant to pull people in and make people think, but at the same time, make them feel entertained and bring them into a common culture. And I think this is a part that's missing, right? That we're missing right now is the sense that there even should be a common culture.
Yeah.
We are so busy dividing ourselves along all sorts of different lines. Primarily, I think these days among racial lines, which is a terrible, terrible injustice to everybody involved.
100%.
There is no resolving those things. If you make immutable characteristics the highest consideration in human interaction, I don't care if we're even talking about politics now, and in any sort of form of human interaction, those create nothing but irreconcilable differences. You can't possibly get past those because they cannot change. It is dividing people among the things that separate them rather than looking for ways to unite them. And I think that's the great challenge of us. It's a challenge for us in the partisan sphere too, right? Because we're talking about issues, we're very passionate about what we believe in. We're talking about border battle, from salemnow.com. And there's people who have different perspectives on immigration and asylum and all these types of things. And while we want to make our case, what we want to do, I think in the end really is we want to first off inform people as to what the issues really are. So B, we can come together and make better decisions on public policy in order to protect the people who are on all sides of the border and do the best things that we can do for the most amount of people.
Yeah, you're right. Well, it's the left that aims to divide us.
Yeah.
That's not actually a right-wing value. The tribalism and things that we're facing, that's really coming from them. That's why they're taking things like race. I mean, it's Marxist oppressed versus the oppressor kind of a thing that they're trying to do there. And on my show, I try to have as many people from the liberal sphere. I've yet to get a lefty on because they don't like to debate or actually discuss ideas, because that would actually expose too much of what they really think, and they don't do well in a format where you're actually discussing viewpoints. So I do have some interesting characters on. Just yesterday, the transgender thing right now, our community here is sort of a hotbed for what's happening, because we have a local school district that we're fighting against that has really doubled down on the sexual indoctrination of kids at very young age and the transgendering of our youth. And so I had Scott Nugent on yesterday, and that'll be coming and airing here in a couple of days. She, a biological woman who transgendered and is kind of gone through a bit of a detransitioning thing, but was featured in the "What Is a Woman" Matt Walsh documentary.
Right.
And it was just a really powerful scene with her. And so I had her on yesterday, and it was a really frank discussion. And of course, we don't agree on everything, but we're co-belligerents in this cause. We do not want to see children abused. We do not want to see children being put on puberty blockers and mutilated and castrated chemically and all of that stuff. And so, hey, we have common cause, and we need to find the sensible common, people there that have some wisdom in that to be fighting this battle along with us.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the reason why we need to keep up dialogues, right? So we can find, because, we're not going to, no one side has all the answers, right? I firmly believe this. We do much better putting our heads together and coming up with collaborative decisions, especially on public policy. And that means that you have to be in contact with people. You have to be engaged. You have to be in dialogue. And I think that that's something that sounds like you're doing really well at Liberty Station, or at least, to the extent that people allow you to do it, right, by engaging with you. But I mean, that's the reason why I think most of us are doing what we do is simply to make sure that we can get the right argument out there and to collaborate on better public policy. And Liberty Station for the Salem Podcast Network. Is that what it's called, by the way, the Salem Podcast Network?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure I had that right. I'm within the town hall media sphere with the Ed Morrissey show. So subsidiary of Salem, they do something different with the Salem side. So The Salem Podcast Network has got some great shows, but Liberty Station's one of them. You got to check that out. One last thing on Border Battles, or Border Battle, I should say, which is at salemnow.com. Bryce, how many episodes are there going to be in total when this is fully up?
Yeah, so I think it's 6, and I think actually we're featured in really the very last one as part of the solution. The private-public partnership and doing something to really solve this problem, because we can. It's possible for us if we have the political will. Right now, there's only one, I think, person out there, Carrie Lake, who's running right now for governor of Arizona, and I think she's likely to win. And she has a real vision to tackle this thing using the power of the state government in Arizona. And I think she's onto something. She'll be one of the really brave voices in this, and will put a plan in action to get it done. And she'll use all of the resources of the state to do it, even if there is some headwinds from the federal government. So it can be solved. There is hope. And it just requires all of us to come together, or the very few heroes like a Carrie Lake. There
you go. All right. So Bryce Eddy, where can people find you and Liberty Station, other than, of course, the Salem Podcast Network? Where are you at on the internet and on the intertubes? I forget who said that first, but I love it.
Yeah. So you can find the Liberty Station podcast everywhere where you digest your podcasts. You can find us on Rumble. We keep getting kicked off of YouTube because I called Fauci a fraud and things like that, and so that got us bumped. But you can also follow me personally on Super Bryce Eddy on Instagram, and also Liberty Station. We've got a Instagram page as well.
So you're not on Twitter then?
I am on Twitter, although I don't tweet that much. I just have all of my fact checkers and everybody who wants to hassle me. They tend to find me there. I check Twitter in the mornings just to get a little bit of brain damage so other people don't, to kind of find out what people are talking about. But I do only a little bit of Twitter there, and you can find me at Bryce Eddy, and I'm pretty easy to find.
Well, there you go. I too am a masochist, so I too check in quite often over at Twitter, where all of my critics tend to congregate, and that's fine.
Yeah, I've got people that are dedicated to fact checking me and dedicated to hassling me, and so I feel pretty honored.
You should feel honored. You've assembled the masses. You can't fault yourself for that. All right, Bryce Eddy, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget again, Border Battle at salemnow.com, and you can subscribe to that, and you should subscribe to it. It looks like a fascinating documentary. Can't wait to see it myself. And we'll also have the trailer posted in the same post as we're doing right now. Again, Bryce, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Stand by for one last message from the Ed Morrissey Show. Thank you for watching or listening to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and through the Town Hall Media Player, or you can just come to hotair.com and watch my podcast for free. However, I'd also love to have you join us as members of our VIP and VIP Gold programs. That allows us to defeat the stranglehold that big tech has on information and get you the best information that we possibly can. Plus, we have a lot of new value-added content coming to us from Town Hall Media stars and my good friend Adam Baldwin. He and I are doing the video series, The Amiable Skeptics. It's 1 hour of discussion a week, strictly for our VIP and VIP Gold members. Plus, we have our VIP Gold chat with Kem Edwards every Wednesday afternoon at 1:30 p.m. We'd love to have you as members. Be sure to join up. Thanks again for watching the Ed Morrissey Show podcast.